Now a budget response by the Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesman, Vince Cable, MP.
Good evening. The financial position of the country is very serious. 1 in every 10 could be out of work by the end of the year. Many shops and factories are being forced to close. More and more homes are being repossessed, and the government's budget deficit has soared. Now, there are some positive developments and good companies that are doing well, and we must avoid Britain being dragged down by negative thinking, doom and gloom. But we must also stop the endless childish bickering between politicians over who's to blame. What's needed is an honest, clear statement of the scale of the problems Britain faces. Unfortunately, the budget is not honest. It simply assumes there will be a spectacular recovery, that there's a magic wand of economic growth. But there isn't. I'm tempted to remind you of the warnings I've given you over these years about the dangers of drifting into a debt crisis. But I don't want to dwell on the past. The Liberal Democrats want to put forward practical, forward-looking proposals to fight the slump. Let me start with the banks. Vast amounts of public money, your money, has been used to avoid a collapse of the banking system. Half the banks are now in practice nationalised, yet good British companies are being refused credit on reasonable terms, are being forced to lay off their workers. Little's been done to stop the greedy bonus culture which led to the bank's collapse, large-scale tax dodging still going on, bad debts are still being hidden. The government has been naive and weak, and it must instruct the banks to operate in the public interest. And then there's the money the government has wasted with its temporary cut in VAT. Far better to use it instead to create jobs and improve the environment, which is why we would spend it on affordable housing, public transport and energy-saving programmes. The massive hole in the budget means that the government cannot cut the overall burden of tax at present, but it could spread the burden of tax more fairly. The government's actually proposing to increase tax on low and average earners. The Liberal Democrats would cut taxes for low-paid workers and pensioners. Income tax shouldn't start until £10,000 a year, it's £200 a week, and this would lift 4 million people out of income tax altogether and give a tax cut of £700 a year for most workers. Many of these people are women, many are carers, many are struggling on low incomes, and they should not be paying income tax. Now, this tax cut would obviously have to be paid for, and there are currently some very generous tax reliefs on wealthy individuals and companies. The budget makes some rather token gestures towards fairness, but the government has allowed far too many tax dodgers to avoid paying for services in Britain. British taxpayers pay through the nose, while the Union Jack still flies over many of the world's tax havens. Pensioners in particular need help. Our state pension is a disgrace, it's the worst in Europe, and millions of elderly people have to struggle on means-tested benefits. And when they apply for help, the government punishes those who've saved. The budget provides modest relief, but the government still assumes that poor pensioners earn 10% interest on their savings. This must stop. Now, Britain will come through the financial crisis. The country has many strengths. But with all the money lost in tax revenue and spent on rescuing the banks, the government's budget is now in tatters. Tough and painful choices will need to be made. We ask the question whether the country can afford, for example, lavish index-linked pensions for senior civil servants and MPs, the overcomplicated tax credit system, military resources stretched to the limit all round the world, or sending half our young people to university when there are now few real jobs for graduates. I promise you the Liberal Democrats will not duck the hard choices ahead, and any party that does simply isn't fit to govern.
That was a budget response by the Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesman.